Stillwater's Morning Scramble. Glad to have you here on a Thursday morning. And lots going on, obviously. And the mayor joins us early today. Good morning, Mayor.
Good morning, Steve.
And you said you're going to set your alarm for this. I was honored.
This is earlier than my normal time slot.
Well, I think you're up because I think you hear some of the interviews at this time. But I know you're getting ready for stuff. But you have a full day, and Mayor Joyce joins us now. I sent you a text last night. I really appreciated your answer right away, but I had been reading your tweet also. You made a statement, probably on Facebook as well, after what the governor had announced in the afternoon. You wanted to get your word out, and I thought it'd be great if you could join us this morning. Where are we in Stillwater right now with what's going on? The governor opening things up somewhat tomorrow with personal care services, and then next week that'll be a little more wide open. What about Stillwater?
So in Stillwater, we're going to continue with the emergency declaration that we've had in place for several weeks now that currently would expire on April 30th. So next Friday, May 1st, would be sort of the first day that would expire under its current term. So we feel like it's best for us to continue along that path, just given, honestly, the surprise with which we received the governor's comments yesterday. That was not something that we had heard was coming, and hadn't really had a chance to evaluate whether that made sense for us. And so we're continuing to do that. We've been I've been in meetings all week talking with different folks about what our reopening plan should look like, and how to phase it in, and all that sort of thing, and what kinds of metrics we need to see before we're comfortable doing that. And so it was a bit of a surprise to see the governor's announcement yesterday, and for us, just given that we're not really comfortable with the amount of data and the type of data that we're seeing at this point, we're gonna leave our order in place through the 30th for now.
Well, one of the things that, if I'm reading this right, he announced the personal care services businesses Friday, and communities that don't have more restrictions in place, which means that the restrictions that we have can stay there. But he also said, and this includes barbershops and that type of stuff, they must follow social distancing. How do you do that at a barbershop?
Yeah, so that's a good question, and I went through a bunch of his stuff last night, trying to see, because he did say in the news conference that there would be some strict social distancing guidelines for those places, and they did post yesterday evening some rules on the Department of Commerce's website for those businesses. But I will say I read through them, and I didn't see much in there that would be considered strict social distancing.
Yeah.
For those businesses. I mean, I know the State Board of Cosmetology has had rules out, and I've actually had a few local people reach out and said, hey, when we do reopen, here is sort of the social distancing guidelines we're going to follow, which in both of those cases were much more comprehensive than what the State Department of Commerce is listing. They don't have a mandatory mask requirement. They don't have a limitation on the number of people in the shop. There's some maybe you should do this or you should consider doing this kind of stuff, but it's pretty loose. And so, just those kinds of issues, it feels a little rushed. It feels like, there's not really stuff in place, especially to announce it, basically 48 hours before those places are supposed to be ready to follow those things. The timing is a little too quick, I think, to really be able to responsibly protect people and to allow those businesses to prepare for what they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, and when you see interviews or whatever, sample size does matter. But I saw a couple of one a beauty salon operator, I think, and this is in the city, and one was a barbershop. They showed his picture, but he was posing with his 90-some-year-old dad, and neither one of those were happy about this and felt comfortable, even though that was their livelihood. I don't know that they were going to go back, even though they may feel pressured to. Have you talked to anybody in those lines of work here in Stillwater and received any input from them?
I have, yeah. Like I said, we had one local owner reach out and kind of tell us what their plans were, but also was very much open to the fact that we needed to wait until we saw clear improvement in the situation, and that it was safe to do so, and that they were expecting to adopt pretty comprehensive measures. I've heard, just in conversation yesterday, because again, this was not something we were anticipating happening.
Right.
And when I, started letting people know, because we had a few stylists that reached out to the city, and I had people that reached out to me directly and said, hey, are we supposed to reopen? Do we have to? Can we? Are you going to let us? And, when we said, well, no, we're going to keep our order in place, the vast majority of those responses were positive, from the community of barbers and stylists and those folks who, I think, like I said, they want to know. I think they want a little bit clearer guidance on what's going to be expected and how to do that. And I think, I don't think people from a public standpoint are necessarily ready to kind of get out there. So it's not like you're going to have full shops and everything, ready to go tomorrow. So, it makes sense to me to say, let's plan this out a little bit more rigorously before we just kind of open the gate.
Now, April, you mentioned April 30th, and that is what they're calling the peak time, I think, right? The projected peak in Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. And then, so May 1st would be next Friday. What's the plan for next Friday? Or I'm guessing this is we're going to wait and see what the numbers and the data says, right?
That's the biggest, I think, thing that's slowing us down from being able to kind of release plans and talk more specifically about what's going to happen, because the data that's provided by the State Department of Health and by our local county health department and by the hospital, who we've all reached out to all those folks and talked to them about what the numbers they're seeing is. But there's different ways to look at all of it, right? And there's not a clear, when the governor came out and when he talked yesterday, he had some charts and graphs of different data that was the first time I had seen those charts, right? Those aren't publicly available on the website. They were a modified way of looking at some of the numbers. He was using like the 7-day total average kind of thing for the new cases, which is not something that they had released or been using in the past. So, there's a lot of confusion, I think, about what actual metrics we need to be looking at to track with what the CDC and the White House released as kind of the gating criteria for when things should start to reopen, which would be to show a 14-day downward trend in new cases in influenza-like illnesses, to show robust testing being available in your community, which, is not defined, but in my conversations with health professionals and with the health department, I don't think anybody feels like our testing would be considered robust. And so, what we're trying to do is figure out what numbers should we be looking at and where do we get those, so which graph is the one that really should control this decision, and what's it need to look like before we move to phase one.
In this world of Zoom and all the meetings, and you're about to have some of that today, I read some of the comments underneath your tweet there, and of what I saw, which at that time was probably 10, and believe it or not, I thought it was probably, even though that's not a lot, that's the sampling was probably, I thought, fairly accurate, because I think 9 of the 10 were favorable and 1 was not. But one of the first ones, and you answered it, said, where can we see this data? And you said you haven't either. And I think here on the outside, we assume that there is communication being made with our local mayors and everything. That is not the case, is it?
Well, not with me. I guess I can say that.
Fair enough.
Governor Stitt yesterday, when he was starting making his announcement, he talked about how he'd been discussing this with OML, the municipal league, and local mayors. But as far as I can tell, there's a group of about 5 of the biggest city mayors who have been in discussion with the governor, privately. I don't, my sense of it is that they were not in favor of this. I mean, Oklahoma City and Tulsa mayors both came out before I did yesterday and said we're keeping our orders in place through the 30th as well, and we'll make decisions here locally. So, yeah, I mean, I don't. There's not a tremendous amount of collaboration happening, and I think that's problematic in the sense that the state's a big place. There are rural parts of the state where you both have growing outbreaks, and there are rural parts of the state where you still don't have any cases at all.
Right.
And so, trying to make a comprehensive decision across that spectrum is pretty difficult. And so, being more regional and more local and trying to say, well, what are the specific concerns of a community like Stillwater as a college town has a whole different set of parameters, right? I mean, we, from my perspective, we want to be, I think, even more careful than any place else about seeing a rebound later this year, because we really need the fall season to be somewhat close to normal, right? I mean,
absolutely.
I think from our standpoint, we're used to slow summer, and if the summer's slower than normal, that's better than a fall that's slower than normal, right? So for us, there's, I think, a little bit even more of an impetus to say, let's take it even slower to try to keep from getting in a position where we have a fall that is interrupted. So, it's just that kind of regional and local variation, I think, needs to be taken into account. And I don't feel like we're getting good regional and local information to be able to do that.
And you're a lawyer, so you understand all this stuff. But the phases that were proposed last week, I guess it's last week when President Trump did that with the three-phase, maybe 2 weeks ago, with the 14 days of showing improvement and stuff, seem to be thrown out the window with this, right?
No, I don't know that I'd say thrown out the window, but there's so much room for interpretation in that, right?
Okay.
So
have we had 14 days? Will we at that time have 14 days of improvement?
I mean, that depends on what graph you look at and
okay.
how you frame it. I mean, the way the graphs the governor put up were very dramatic downward trends, but if you look at the Oklahoma City mayor has put out graphs of their local case count day over day, and there was a high point at the beginning of April when testing really started to ramp up, and it dropped after that. But since then, it's been flat, if not trending up. I mean, their last 3 or 4 days in a row have been higher than the day before in Oklahoma City. So, again, it just depends on which graph you look at and how you frame it. I think the governor said, hey, we've met all these criteria that the president put in place. But I think a lot of us, including the Oklahoma State Medical Association, who came out yesterday afterwards and said we don't think it's time, they're looking at the data again, through a little bit of a different lens and saying, no, that's not 14 days of decline. That's the difficulty with all of this, Steve, is there's so many different opinions and there's so many different...
Sounds like it's kind of like polling, presidential polling or whatever. You can pick your favorite, right?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of do, you can find data somewhere that will support what you want to do. And so it depends on, to me, are you being driven by a good comprehensive look at data and looking at the good charts and the bad charts and trying to find the middle ground? Or are you finding the data that supports what you already want to do? And that's, what I'm afraid we're seeing at a state level is that we're looking at, well, we really want to get open, which of course we all want that. We absolutely want that, but
yeah, I saw you got your hair cut the other day, so that was good. So.
No, I didn't. My wife cut my hair a couple weekends ago.
Well, no, that's what I meant. That's what I meant. I saw the picture on the deck.
Yeah. I guess I did put that on Twitter. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it was advertised. Looked good too. Actually,
you did a good job. It's time for another one. I need her to trim it up again. But yeah, I mean, we all want to be open. We all want to get out of this and get through it. But from my standpoint, I want to try to get a much broader look at really the true conditions of what's happening in our area, in our region. How does it affect us specifically, and try to make that plan as honestly as conservative as possible. Again, because we want to focus so much on making sure we don't have to shut stuff back down in September, August, September, and November.
Okay, a follow-up to an interview I had yesterday with Sherry Fletcher. And I just wonder how this affects that conversation, because we were talking about the possible, and this came out of the council also, possible mandatory use of masks here. Mm-hmm. How does this affect that decision with this news coming out? Because people are hearing that message as well. Where do we stand on that?
I think, I've been kind of moving forward with what we're looking at planning-wise in terms of when we start opening shops or when we start opening barbershops or beauty salons, that sort of thing. That part of the requirements on reopening those places will be the mandatory use of masks. I think that's in line with the CDC's guidance. It's in line with what the White House report says. Certainly in places like barbershops where you can't maintain 6 feet of distance, you absolutely should be wearing a mask. So I think it's very likely, if not fully assured, that we will see, as part of those reopening plans, that mandatory masks, will be required in public settings or in places where, you're going to be interacting with other people, especially if that contact is sort of unavoidably close.
I assumed when he was saying the social distancing will be observed even in barbershops, that was what he was referring to, is that the sanitation thing is going to be at its peak with gloves and all that. That's the only way you can do that.
True too.
Well,
and that's the part where I'm, we're not seeing those sort of that level of restrictions based on what they've put out so far, and I don't understand why it's not more restrictive.
Yeah, and and I think it's important to repeat the fact that everybody wants our economy to be moving, and I know people personally now that have been laid off, and that in this industry, and that's hard to see, and they want to go back to work too. But the big effect, I think you made a great point in the fact that we need our fall here. We need to be active in the fall, whether you're the restaurants or you're the landlords or whoever you might be. And hunkering down seemed to be the plan.
Yeah. I mean, it's very difficult for a lot of people in Stillwater. There's from a business perspective, employees who can't work, and that is the part of this that is just so difficult to try to make these decisions, because it does have such a direct impact on individuals and their livelihoods. And I think again that the best way to try to solve that problem is to look at the big picture and try to look long term, right? Because a seesaw of opening back up and then seeing a spike and having to close back down, I think is even harder on businesses and on employees who don't know, if it's the 2-week window and cases go up, and then, now we got to back it down, so now you're back off for 2 more weeks, and I think stability in that opening plan is more important long term than just trying to get somebody out there as quick as possible.
Yeah.
And that's the approach we're taking. I am talking to Chamber today and business owners. We're talking to our local public entities. Vice Mayor is talking to some nonprofits and churches in the community this week as well, to kind of chat through where we sort of, what we're looking at and what we're thinking in terms of plans, and try to get some input on those things. But honestly, Steve, like you said, for the vast majority of the comments and the feedback we've got, our people want to be more cautious, and they want to make sure we're not putting people at risk, and they want a long-term viable solution to this, and not just a quick fix.
Yeah, and I know there's a lot of different opinions. I heard a sports analogy. It's kind of like having a big lead in a football game midway through the third quarter and taking the foot off the pedal, and we've seen that backfire before. And you say,
Absolutely.
I think we've got this licked. So
that's a really good one. I mean, we're I saw one that it's like jumping out of an airplane and the parachute slows you down, and you're still 500 feet off the ground, and you say, okay, well, I slowed down, so let's take this parachute off now. Right? I mean, we are not through it, right? We have social distancing is working. We're seeing positive effects of that. Stillwater and Payne County and our local community has done a great job, and we continue to be, I think, on a per capita basis and comparative to other places, in better shape. But I don't see that as a reason to lift everything and celebrate and say, oh, we did a great job, we won, I think it's just an indication that we've got to, like you said, keep our foot on the gas and keep it going through the final whistle.
Hey, it's time to let you go to your meetings. I saw your morning schedule anyway, and it's packed. So I do appreciate your time. I really do, because this is early in the morning, and I think people wanted to hear from you. So I appreciate that.
No problem. Thank you, Steve. I appreciate you having me on.
Thank you. There you go. And we'll talk to you Monday, by the way, right?
Yes, I'll be on Monday morning.
All right. There's our Monday morning mayor, Will Joyce.